5, 6, and...
Dickerson Family Content. It's a name that we totally made up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What's up, guys? Luke here, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 films of 2021. I know we're pretty far into 2022, but you know, I had some movies I wanted to see that I wanted to catch up on before making this video. So it's a little late, but you know, it's still January, so it's fine. Anyway, let's just get right into it. So keep in mind, this is just my list. These are my personal favorite movies of the year, and I mean, a lot of people are definitely going to disagree with some things on this. That's just how it is. And I think, you know, there are some films on this list that I think are maybe objectively better, but I put them lower than films that I just enjoyed more, because this is just my personal opinion. So if you disagree, that's cool. Maybe drop your list in the comments. I'd love to see that. Anyway, let's just hop right into it. Let's kick it off with some honorable mentions. In the honorable mentions category, we have The Card Counter, directed by Paul Schrader, West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg, Tick Tick Boom, directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda, The Matrix Resurrections, directed by Lana Wachowski, and Spencer, directed by Pablo Larraín. I really did love and enjoy all those films. They just did not crack my top 10, but still in the top 15, which is really good. Anyway, let's get into the main top 10 list. Number 10 is The Tragedy of Macbeth, directed by Joel Cohen. This film was just such an interesting, creative take on a classic tale, in my opinion. Macbeth is already my favorite Shakespeare play, and I feel like a lot of modern interpretations of it just try way too hard to be gritty or realistic and just end up coming across as very unrelatable and just hard to enjoy. But this film went for a much more highly stylized route that brought out the tone and emotions of the story without really caring that much about being realistic, and that just made it feel much more modern and watchable and interesting. The acting as well was incredible. This film was one of my favorite versions of these characters that I've seen, and it just really captured that, like, I don't know, it just really captured the dread and madness of the original story, but it also kind of gave it a new shade of old age to it, which I found really interesting for the story, especially considering how these characters are usually cast much younger, but I think it worked really well the way it was done in this film. Number 9 is Annette, directed by Leo Carax. There were so many musical films that came out this year, and I enjoyed a lot of them. I'm a big musical guy, but Annette turned out to be my favorite, surprisingly. I really did not know what to expect from this film, but it just really blew me away. The story is just so weird and interesting and has so much commentary to it about, like, these famous male artists and, like, that kind of person's, like, space in our world in the modern day. And it also just had a lot to say about art in general and, like, the ego of the artist. And it was also just so stylistically over the top and entertaining. There are just so many decisions that are just so creative. I have really never seen in films before, and it was just so enjoyable to watch a film just really just go for it with all this crazy creative stuff while also having a really interesting story with really interesting characters. And the music is also incredible. I never really listened to Sparks before this, but since seeing this film, I've gotten to more of their music and I really like it. So I'm very thankful for this film for that reason as well, for introducing me to Sparks. They're really good and you should check them out and you should watch this film. It was very divisive and not everyone's going to like it, and that's good in my opinion, because that means, you know, it has a specific vision to it that's going to click for some people and not going to click for other people, and I really appreciate that about it. So continuing the films that aren't going to click with everybody, number 8 is Titan, directed by Julia Ducournau. Now, If you haven't seen this film, you've probably at least heard of it as the film where the main character has sex with a car. And, well, that is something that happens in the film. It really is so much more than that. I don't typically enjoy films like this where there's just all this like weird, disturbing, crazy stuff happening, because it just ultimately feels like you're supposed to be, oh wow, that's really weird and crazy and disturbing, but you don't really get anything from it. But in this film, all of the weird, disturbing things are in service of the themes and emotions, and I found it to actually be a very emotionally powerful story about just the need for love and the need for someone to take care of you, which I did not expect from this film, but it is a very emotional film, and it just taps into like human emotions in such a visual, cinematic way that just felt very, very powerful. And it just uses the form of cinema in like such an interesting way that I have just never really seen before. It really kind of blew my mind, and I think for some people this may be like the best thing they've seen all year, and for some people it's probably the worst thing they've seen all year. I really liked it, and the only reason it's not higher on this list is really just a matter of personal taste, but I'd say this may very well be the most ambitious film of the year. Alright, number 7 is Dune, directed by Denis Villeneuve. I have been anticipating this film since I was 12. Dune is one of my favorite novels. I just think the world building and commentary and story is just incredible. There's really nothing else like it in the world of literature, and I think this film brought the story to the screen very, very well. It captures the tone and sort of mystery and dread and intrigue of the novel in a very cinematic manner. I just love the tone of it. It's just so strange. It brings out the sort of arcane militarism and imperialism that the world of the novel is built around, while also having this sense of being in a complete different world that we've never seen before, which, you know, you don't really ever see that kind of tonal mix in stories ever. But, you know, Dune has provided that because it's a big crazy space world without robots. You have this really cool mix where the film gets to have commentary on, you know, forms of government and oppression and colonialism that have existed for years and years and years, while also getting this vision of a completely different society. And it is just so interesting to watch, and I think this film really brings out the characters of the novel really well in a lot of interesting ways. I have a video about the film that came out a few weeks ago. You should check that out. I really get into more depth about my opinions on this film. Overall, this is just a very good film. I think once part 2 comes out and you can watch part 1 and part 2 like back to back, it's going to be just like a masterpiece. And part 1 didn't, you know, quite reach that level because you don't get the like complete ending yet, but it still felt like a complete story, at least in a character standpoint, and I think it was really necessary to fully explore the story, to split it into 2 films. So yeah, this was a really, really good film. I would highly recommend it. Number 6 is The French Dispatch, directed by Wes Anderson. This film is just a delight. You know, it's 3 different stories all set around this magazine in this town in France, and it's just so delightful. Each story is so creative and interesting, but also they're each very melancholy and emotional and kind of sad in their own way. And it was just really neat to see such a depth of emotions and themes being explored in such a fun, creative way, and in Wes Anderson's classic visual style, but taken to the absolute extreme in this film. And it just zips around with so much frenetic energy, and you just get so sucked into the world, but it's also just so emotionally compelling in a lot of ways, and I found myself even tearing up a little at the end. And this film is just a lovely tribute to writers and storytellers, but it also has a lot of really interesting and nuanced underlying themes, and overall, it's just a wonderful film. Number 5. The Green Knight, directed by David Lowery. David Lowery's previous film, A Ghost Story, is one of my favorite movies, so it's no wonder I loved this film. It is just such a unique vision for the fantasy genre. It brings in so many more psychological elements than what you usually see. It really captures this sense of dread that you don't see in a lot of fantasy films, but it's the dark ages. These were dark times, and this film captures that so well. It really puts an element of fear and mystery into the fantastical side of things that you don't really see in fantasy content anymore, but you did see in much older stories that, got a lot darker and more grim, and just really used these kinds of stories to explore the darker side of the human psyche. And this film absolutely did that in some really interesting and creative and poetic ways. It deals with really interesting emotional themes of like honor and loyalty in a society that's just kind of dreadful, and it can feel like these concepts mean nothing. And Dev Patel's performance just captures all these emotions so well. It is a film that is just so interesting in its tone and visual style, and it is easily one of the best modern fantasy films ever made, in my opinion. Number 4 is Pig, directed by Michael Sarnowski. When you hear that the concept of a movie is Nicolas Cage plays a man who lives in the woods and goes on a quest to find his kidnapped pet pig, you probably expect something insane or crazy with Nicolas Cage doing all this crazy, like, where's my pig stuff. But this film is... Ignore my terrible Nicolas Cage impression. This film is actually just very emotional and character-based. There's pretty much no action in this film. All the conflicts are solved, or sometimes not solved, in a very conversational manner. And it really explores a lot of philosophies about the meaning of life, and shows like the different ways those philosophies can be lived by or not lived by. And it's just so deeply empathetic to all of its characters. A major aspect of the film is it's just about the human experience and caring about and being connected to one another, and understanding other people, even though that can be really hard sometimes. And it's such a emotional and poetic film, and I just did not expect it at all. It has an amazing performance from Nicolas Cage, and it's just one of those films that's very small scale, but because of that, it was one of the most emotional and touching films that I saw all year. Number 3, The Power of the Dog, directed by Jane Campion. I'd say this film may be the objective best film on this list, which, art is inherently subjective, so like that means nothing. Like, in my opinion, it's the objectively best film on the list, so whatever, just ignore that. But anyway, this film is just such an interesting and kind of frightening and deeply layered film. It has so much to say about toxic masculinity and internalized homophobia, and it has this overlying theme of like control and being controlled and fighting against control in a lot of different ways. And there are so many layers to the story and character motivations, where like at first you're like, what's going on? Why is this happening? Then you're like, oh, we're going in this direction. But then you're like, oh, we're going in this direction. And then at the end of the film, you're kind of like, what? But then like after watching it, I woke up the next morning and I was like, oh, that's really smart. So there's just so many layers to the themes and characters and emotions of this film, and it is all presented in just such an interesting way. There's so much tension in the directing. The scene with the cigarettes toward the end, it's got to be one of the most tense scenes I have ever seen in my life. If you've seen the film, you know exactly what I mean. The acting is so good all across the board. Maybe a career best performance from Benedict Cumberbatch. At first I thought his performance seemed a little weird, but once you realize what's actually going on, his acting is just really ingenious in this film. It just sucks you into this unique place and time in such a genuine and investing way. And you're just always, when you're watching this film, you're just always on the edge of your seat, even though it's like a slow burn drama. and you're just always waiting to see what the next thing is that's going to happen, what the next twist will be, and you're always piecing it together, and it just all comes together so well in the end, and it is just such an ingenious film, and it's just really incredible. You gotta watch it. Number 2, Come On, Come On, directed by Mike Mills. Similar to Pig, this is a film where it's very small scale and intimate, and it's just all the better for it. It's a very simple story about an uncle taking care of his nephew, but I just love how it just really focuses on how these small relationships that are in everyone's lives can be the most important part of your life, and how the perspective of a child can really teach adults so much about the world and how they view things. And it's just directed in such a personal way that you just feel so connected to these characters. All of the acting is wonderful, and it's just a film that really deals with the idea that in a world that feels increasingly grim, there are just many different perspectives and outlooks to have, and it just is a film that really has a lot to say about perspective in life and the different perspectives that you can look at things, and the different things that matter to different people, and how to deal with your own emotions, how to deal with other people's emotions. And it's all done in such a personal and affecting way, and I just really, really loved it. All right, my number 1 favorite movie of the year. It is my number 1 favorite film of the year is Licorice Pizza, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. And this may be pretty surprising, as this film, objectively speaking, is maybe a little flawed. I know a lot of people who did not like it very much, and that's fine. I just found myself really enjoying this film a lot. The characters are just so fun and energetic and easy to connect to, and they're also kind of idiots who make really bad decisions. And the world of the film is just so easy to get sucked into. It's so fun and bright, but there's also a lot of underlying tensions to the story and underlying darkness. And it's really just a story about 2 people searching for meaning and validation in a place that keeps promising it to them and doesn't really give it to them, but they find it with each other. And I liked how it wasn't that much of a romance film. It was more of like a weird friendship film, which I liked a lot. I think that direction was a lot more realistic for it than the typical like magical movie romance. And the shenanigans that the characters get into just all feel very driven by them as people. And I think overall, like I said, this film is just a really good and really entertaining study of validation and why people want emotional and professional validation, and where people look for that and where it can actually be found. And I just think this film is just a perfect combination of being entertaining and thoughtful and emotional and intelligent, and that is why it's my favorite film of the year. Alright guys, thank you for sitting through this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe and drop your list of the best films of the year in the comments. I'd love to see them. And if you agreed with this list, let me know. If you didn't, let me know that as well. I'd love to see other people's opinions on the films of this year and of the films that I listed. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you guys later. Bye.